Welcome, everyone. I hope that you are having a lovely day. Has become my very favorite song. I don't know if I heard it before I started becoming a solid fan of Dr. Goldie Muhammad, but now I cannot unhear this song. I could be walking through a store, I can be in my car, and Lovely Day comes on. So I hope it gives you that same feeling of joy, my favorite part of her framework. And I just welcome you. I'm glad you're spending your beautiful day with us. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues. I know some of you have been with us all of our sessions, but it always helps if we've got someone new to remind you who your team is. So I'm going to toss it over to Jeff.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jeff Austin. I'm a literacy consultant here at RISA, and I've been a writing teacher forever and ever and ever, it seems like. And so I'm really excited to talk about writing this week in our framework. So we've arrived at that point, and what an exciting time it is. I'll throw it over to Roz, and she can introduce herself. Dr. Shahid.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm so excited to have you here. I, too, am a literacy consultant here at Wayne RISA. We are so pleased to have you with us. In addition to my work with literacy, I really center my work around equity. I think I can speak for my colleagues as well. And so that's what you'll see today is access points, but through the lens of writing. So welcome back.
Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Snapp. I'm one of the newbies to the literacy team. I am a literacy consultant, so welcome, welcome, welcome. And I'm following in Dr. Shahid's footsteps. I am also interested in equity, so that's where my passion is.
Well, thank you. And I'm Laura Gabrion. I have been a literacy consultant at Wayne RISA for the last 4 years, and I'm so blessed to have such an incredible team that I work with every day. I think that we've just got so many wonderful things that we offer, but also just so many things that we learn from each other. So hopefully that will be something that happens for you today as we move through thinking about writing from that student-centered perspective, really putting them into the driver's seat, giving them compelling reasons to write for authentic purposes and audiences, and some of the ways that we can get at that. So we're going to begin with our land acknowledgement. We begin by acknowledging that the land on which we stand is the ancestral land of several indigenous tribes, including the Anishinaabe, or Three Fires, which were comprised of the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi. Also in the area were the Peoria, Fox, Wyandotte, and Miami tribes. The land was seceded to the United States as part of the Cession 66 in 1807. The tribes named in the treaty were the Chippewa, Ottawa, Wyandotte, and Potawatomi. We encourage you to do more research on the history of this treaty and consider the motivations behind its creation, as well as its long-term impacts on all generations. Our agenda for today is that we'll look at the rationale for today's session. If you've been with us for all 4 of our sessions so far, you'll notice that we're tying 2 main documents together. Well, actually 3. If you think of our Literacy Essentials grades 4-5 and our Literacy Essentials grades 6 through 12, we're looking at them through the lens of Dr. Kimberly Parker's Literacy is Liberation book. And I know that some of you received a copy of that book or will be shortly, so that's a wonderful place to start for the year. We'll look at our values and working agreements. I want you to consider your own literacy timeline. We'll look at the guiding principles that kind of frame our writing that we want to do with our students, the essential practices, and really think about how the writing process enables us to get at both principles and practices. All right. With no further delay, I'd like us to take a minute to look at the equity statement that our team constructed and our own Dr. Rosalyn Shahid narrated. I want you to just take a few minutes to view it. And as you're viewing it, consider what affirms your current classroom practice and what invites you to continue growing your practice in the upcoming school year.
We, the Wayne Risa Literacy Team, continue to explore, learn, and collaborate with one another in an effort to advance literacy practices that promote equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racist. To that end, we have crafted beliefs and commitments to advancing this work. We believe literacy is actionable, liberatory, and humanizing. We believe robust interdisciplinary literacy instruction empowers students' voice and agency to enact positive change. We believe equitable literacy instruction connects to students' identities by linking literacy to their histories and cultures while developing their skills, intellect, criticality, and joy. We believe equitable literacy practices are not static. They are ongoing and fluid. We believe in fostering opportunities for students to improve their reading, writing, thinking, and speaking abilities in ways that prepare them to more fully understand power, oppression, equity, and how they might lift their voice for positive change. We believe students should have access to enabling texts that are culturally and socially relevant and tasks that are robust and engaging. We also believe to enact change, we must examine our own biases and develop knowledge of our world by exploring multiple perspectives. So to that end, we pledge to create brave spaces that honor individual and collective journeys, to interrogate our beliefs as they pertain to pedagogy, curriculum, and school policies. We also pledge to facilitate courageous conversations and to push our growing edge. If you are interested in starting these conversations in your school or district, please see the link below for the works that have inspired us, and we thank you.
So when we look at our rationale for today's session, we look at these words at the bottom, and you heard all of these words in our equity statement, that literacy is actionable, humanizing, liberatory, and evolving. Could you just take 1 minute, whether you unmute or you place it in the chat, and think about how literacy falls into these 4 big pieces, these 4 buckets. Can you think of a way that that's happening in your classroom, that literacy is actionable, humanizing, liberatory, or evolving? And again, you can unmute or you can just place it in the chat. We've got Dr. Shahid saying that literacy is actionable because it should go beyond the walls of the classroom. That's something I thought about too. Thank you, Nancy. It opens doors to learn about students' world, so it liberates them. And Jeff added that it's evolving because it means more than just reading print text. There are many ways to be literate. When we think about these words as framing the way that we teach, especially in this case for today's session, writing, we want to humanize our students. We want them to move beyond the walls of our classroom. We want to think about preparing them for a world that they are going to be the decision makers, these global citizens. And as Jennifer added, it's humanizing because we honor and learn about all cultures. So we say this in our equity statement. We have a text that's guiding our work this summer blitz, but we also want to live it in our classrooms. We want to make sure that not only are our students exposed to literacy that's humanizing and liberatory and evolving and actionable, but that we give them opportunities to make it so. And so our working agreements have been the same throughout our series too. My favorite forever has been to engage in humble inquiry, because I know that I don't know everything and I'm always learning. And I love that about being an educator. I hope that there's something in this 4 that resonates with you. And we'll move on to our work today. I want you to think a few minutes about what has been your kind of timeline, your literacy timeline, your literacy narrative. What were some of the most memorable experiences you've had as a reader and a writer? And you can set it up, you can jot it down in a, to kind of a journal form or a list form. Maybe you'll set up a year-by-year timeline. We'll just take a couple of minutes to do that. But I want you, when you jot these down, to think of one event in your timeline and describe why it made you feel valued. And then we'll have some time to share. So just your literacy events, the moments that shaped you, one in particular that made you feel valued, and we'll share those when we're done. So just take a couple of minutes. You can turn off your camera and just take about 2 minutes to jot some ideas down. Hopefully that gave you enough time to get some ideas down. Would anybody like to share, whether in the chat or just unmuting, what were some of those times? What is that one event where you really felt valued as a writer?
I can share an experience that first came to my mind. It wasn't so much as a writer, but just where I thought the first time where my thoughts were valued. Was really like in college. I went to Michigan State when I went to my first like Socratic seminar style class, because we had never had that in my high school. Or I was my language classes, when we read poetry, I really felt like I was allowed to give my opinion. And then for the first time, it wasn't like right or wrong answers. It was like, what did you see in this text or this prose? And I really felt like I could add something. So that's something that stuck out to me.
Thank you, Rebecca. And that is actually echoed in the chat. Angela says that freedom of expression, being able to express my thoughts and feelings and ideas. And as you said, Rebecca, not being told that those ideas or thoughts or feelings are incorrect, that there's a broad way, range of ways that we can interpret what we're reading. Anyone else? I love that. Go ahead, Roz.
Yeah, I'm just going to add my earliest memory of really just feeling like a writer was at my grandmother's kitchen table. She was such a great storyteller. And so I would mimic those stories that she shared in writing. And then she would, want me to read my stories to our family and her friends. So I think like that experience supported me as a writer. And I hadn't thought about it that way, but those are my earliest memories. So thank you for giving me that moment to think back on that time at my grandmother's kitchen table.
I love that. And Joseph added, seeing experiences and thoughts that mirrored my own. I think this is really important. And I think it's something that we forget about sometimes, is how our reactions and our words and our body language either express value to our students or sometimes stop them cold. They don't move forward because of something we've said or done. And sometimes it's unintentional, of course, but how powerful our valuing of them leads to them valuing themselves. And Jeff, I like that, advocacy letters to officials. That's funny. In 6th grade, I remember my running a student newspaper with my middle schoolers, and they were all incensed because the water was a little rusty when it came out of their water fountain. So they did a whole campaign, and you've got these little bodies, and they're so moved to make something different. And I thought that was really an awesome opportunity. But I can see that you had a similar one, Jeff, as a student. So in an article by Marcel Haddix that Jeff just shared with me about a month or so ago, she talks about these guiding principles for any writing program. And they, are enumerated on the left side here, where teachers must be writers themselves. It's something that, again, we forget about. I've attended many summer offerings through the National Writing Project, and that's what they tell us. Teachers should be writers. Teachers of writing should be writing. And oftentimes when my students would write, I would think, well, this would be a great time to take attendance, or send the lunch count down to the office, or whatever those things were that were duties that I had to attend to. But if we stop and we write alongside them, as Penny Kittle says, we are the most important writer in the room. We're modeling for them. We want our students to see themselves as writers. We want to cultivate spaces for students to write and give them opportunities to write in multiple ways, for multiple purposes, in multiple genres, for multiple audiences. We want to honor and respect that youth-led and youth-centered writing practices, those practices that are going to empower our students. I want you to think a minute about which of those principles resonates with you. But I think, as I said, my most difficult one was seeing myself as a writer. Even though I love to write, even though that's my preferred mode, I still didn't think of it as something that would give my students the sense of themselves as a writer, that if I shared things that I was stumbling upon, that they would see that there's vulnerability in writing, and it doesn't matter what age you are or how much experience you've had, that you will encounter some of the same things they will when they write. So I want to think for a minute about our essential instructional practices. And I know that Jennifer's going to put the link in the chat to the whole suite of documents. We've talked about them a little bit before, but the suite of documents goes from birth to 12th grade. And we've got, a birth to age 3, a pre-K, a K through 3, a grades 4 and 5, and then our 6 through 12. So this whole entire suite of documents focuses in on 10 essential practices. For the self-contained classrooms, we look at them as 10 essential practices that you should be doing every day with every child. So that basically, if you're hitting on these 10 essential practices, you're going to improve the literacy skills of that student, those students. But when we look at them in the grades 6 through 12, we know that hitting 10 essential practices every day in a class that might only be 45 minutes long is probably not possible. So we look at them across a unit, or, an extended lesson. So we look at all 10 of those practices as coming into play as students move through perhaps a novel study or a project or a research paper or something like that. All right, so when we look at our 4-5 essential practices, they are kind of I guess the foundational practice is practice number 1. So we're looking at deliberate research-informed efforts to foster motivation and engagement within and across lessons. And what we see in these teacher-facing documents is bulleted items. These are the things that a teacher should do to get at that motivation and engagement. And then in our grades 4-5, we look at specific things that we should be doing for research-informed and standards-aligned writing instruction. So one of the big ones, obviously, is the writing process. Thinking about how we're giving our students time for planning, drafting, peer reviews, our reviews, revision, presentation of some sorts. But we also want to think about helping them understand text features as they appear in various genres. We want to have them study models, whether those are student written or professionally produced, or that the teacher has provided those models. We want to give them explicit instruction in writing strategies and in strategies that perfect their writing, things like conventions. At the 612 level, that kind of foundational practice is our problem-based instruction. And we think about it from that perspective, because we know if we give them something, a question to answer or a problem to solve or something to inquire about, that we give them a compelling reason to read and to write, to discuss with other students. So we look at that as foundational. And when we get to those writing portions, we look at, again, opportunities to embed the writing process. We look at discipline-specific writing processes, strategies, and conventions. So if students are writing, it's a report for science, they might need to write down the hypothesis and what methods they use to, experiment to kind of test their hypothesis. They will need to capture their results. Maybe they need to outline the materials they used, the procedure they used. It will be different, of course, for something like a short story, but we do need to guide our students in understanding that. We give them, information about those text features, but we also show them models and we give them time to practice. And we want to engage them in something that's driving them. So for example, in ELA, often that problem frame is an essential question that drives all of the reading they're doing in a particular unit, but it's helping them answer a question. So if that essential question is something like, what does it mean to be American? And they've read all of these different pieces that explain what different people think it means, then they can produce their own perspective and answer that as they write, whether it's a paper or they present something or they create a website. We're giving them, again, a reason to drive that writing. So I want you to think about those principles that Haddix provided for us. And I want you to think about those essential practices. And then we move to the process, the writing process. And we know that the writing process is driving that writing instruction. It helps us think about all of the steps students need to take, but we want to remind ourselves and our students that those steps are not linear. It's a recursive process where we might be all the way to the final copy and we realize we're back to rewriting, or we're back to gathering some information, whether it's via research or talking to others, so that we are constantly evolving in that piece until we get to a point, either a deadline or a place that we're satisfied. So I want you to think for a minute about just the choosing of topics. So one thing you can think about is how your reading selections can provide students with topics that they really care about, or thinking about the types of issues students confront in their communities and our families that would be, again, compelling for them to investigate. And as Kimberly Parker, the author of Literacy is Liberation, talks about, we want them to be literacy citizens of the world. We don't want literacy to be something that they think about in just a school context. This is a life skill. We're readers and writers every day of our lives, and it's in all different ways. And I always think about my colleague that just recently retired. We miss her on our literacy team, but she talked about her husband's work in the kind of reading and writing he did on a regular basis to be able to work in heating and cooling, and think about the types of equipment he needed to install, what kinds of guiding documents would help him do the job that he does. And then also how he communicated with his clients was unique to the position that he held. That's true for everything that our students will do, both inside of school and outside of school. Another thing that we want to think about is how we are going to get them to the point of writing. So how are they going to gather information? We were just talking about this last week. One of our researchers for the grades K-3 literacy essentials was talking about text sets. And actually, Dr. Shahid brought this up last week, and we didn't have quite enough time to get into it because, as always, we seem to have more to tell you than we have time for. But Dr. Sarah Lupo wrote an article about text sets, and in it, she talks about the target text, adding a visual text, adding an accessible text, and an informational text. And so in this case, if, for example, your target text was, Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, you might play a video or add some, maybe an infographic, or you could have the students looking at a work of art or a photograph. And then you'll think about an accessible text, a text that all of your students will be able to read and comprehend, and then add an informational text. So in essence, what you're doing is you're building their schema, you're building some background knowledge around that target text. Now, some people caution, it doesn't necessarily have to be 4 texts, and it doesn't have to be these types of texts. You can layer in a variety of ways, but often it's helping students get at that target text by giving them enough to understand and comprehend it, by exposing them to some other types of text. So those text sets become very important. Now, one of the things I think about too is giving students an opportunity to do a little primary research, to produce a text of their own. It's not as easily translatable in a literary text as it is sometimes when we think about like a community problem of some kind. But maybe you could have students interview. Maybe part of the reason that you're reading The Raven is that they're going to produce poetry themselves. So maybe as they're working through that process, you have them engage in interviews with other classmates. How did you come up with the ideas for this poem? What kind of rhyme scheme did you use? What drove some of your word choices? Whatever it would be, but that allows them to look at it from that kind of perspective, from that primary source perspective. And to just share Dr. Shahid's thinking is, we're trying to give students access to texts in multimodal ways. That's what it means to be culturally responsive. And we want to, of course, drive towards our own definition. It's actionable because students will be able to produce texts themselves. All right, and then if you think about the concept of a writing workshop, this is really student-led. As Kittle and Gallagher have, kind of written about pretty prolifically, just that concept of a writing workshop where you start with a mini lesson, you give independent time for writing, and then the majority of that session is sharing with peers, conferring with the teacher, that's really driving, the way that Kittle and Gallagher, they more or less work these 2 bullets together, where they as students are independently writing, they're moving around the room and conferring with them. And that writing workshop is really linked to what Parker is telling us in our book, Literacy is Liberation. We need to promote literacy as relational. It's something that is social. And we know that writing workshops are student-centered because of that. They are driving that, the writing that they're doing. They're doing the types of things that all writers do. They get some ideas, they run with them. Sometimes they don't, because they go in a completely different direction. They talk to others, they generate ideas that way, they get feedback. This is what writers do. So we want, again, thinking of those disciplinary literacy essentials, especially for 6-12, but also for grades 4-5, we are giving them practice at being writers. We're apprenticing them into that activity. And we want to think of it as being culturally relevant. These are structured spaces that embody routines and rituals. And I want you to think about that for a minute. And if anybody can just kind of either add to the chat or unmute, what are some of these routines and rituals that need to be present for our students to be successful as writers?
Hello.
Yes. Hi.
Hi. I teach in high school, and I'm not an English or a writing teacher. I actually teach math. And one of the things that I've been incorporating over the last few years is to make sure that I'm using writing in math, because they seem to think that you don't write in math. And then when they see story problems, they think that they don't need to read the problems in math, that everything should just be numbers. So I've had students for a couple, because I do geometry and algebra too. So the second year, I've really seen the difference that they have in their attitude towards like writing and math and story problems, because we're trying to do it in other subjects, just not reading and writing.
I love that so much, because when and I'm kind of on the back end, the literacy essentials, the disciplinary literacy essentials were written starting in 2016. They were fine-tuned and rewritten and revised many times before they became the document that you can see from the link today. And it's even been revised in the last year to make sure that we are, cognizant of, culturally relevant literacy instruction across disciplines. But I love what you said so much, because we often run into this where students and even some teachers will say, well, what kind of writing are we doing in math? What kind of reading should math students be doing? Well, whatever mathematicians are doing, right? So is it the generation of a story problem? Is it a theorem? Is it, that's what we don't want them to write an essay in math about being a math student. Well, I mean, I guess if you wanted them to, think about that and maybe reflect, but definitely you want those authentic math. What is math writing look like?
Right. Yeah. And like I said, I've seen it get better. And I've even actually have had some teachers say, I know you guys are scared of story problems. And it's like, oh man, we can't just say that, because we're letting them believe that they should be. Like, we have to just take that stigma away from reading and writing and math.
That's so true too. It goes back to what we said in the beginning. So when were we valued as writers, whether it's math writers or history writers or science writers or, writers of literature, whatever that is, we need to feel that we can do it. I think that's just beautiful.
Thank you.
And I'm looking at Jeff added that geometry especially lends itself to many, many different writing opportunities. We've got some other math, Nancy, math problems embedded in a science text. So they have to read it and also solve the problem. So that's really at the heart of all of this, right? I mean, students are reading and writing more than at any other point in human history. There were some researchers that have a line that says that was a turn of the century research study. But the point is that, I mean, think about, we're holding in our hands most of the day a computer with access to all kinds of things that we're reading and we're exposed to ideas and opinions regularly. So we have to help them be able to, this morning in a different session that I attended, Dr. Troy Hicks from Central Michigan University talked about, then our next step is guiding them and being able to navigate this, to understand what's opinion and what's fact and how to deduce some of their own, perspectives on all of this information they're confronted with. But I think, like Dr. Shahid said, that this is where we get to the heart of student-centered writing. And we want to remember that as we move to a final product, that final product doesn't have to be the traditionally handwritten, well, gosh, I don't even know if anyone handwrites anymore. My mom has convinced me that if I write a note to my kids in cursive, I'll have lost them right there. Nobody does cursive anymore. But we don't have to have a typed research paper. We can have blogs, websites, presentations. Students can write plays. They can create videos. They can write a speech. They can write letters. We really want to think of text so broadly, not only the text they read, like we talked about in the beginning, that we get at reading in these multimodal, texts, but we also want them to be able to produce those types of texts and have some choice in the kind of text they produce. Yes, calligraphy, that's one I never learned. And my handwriting is so bad anymore. I blame it on all the typing we do. All right, and then just thinking about writing for change, there is a great book. It's called Reading for Action, and it's just such a wonderful text for anyone who works with students through young adult fiction. So if you're teaching ELA or you're doing something else where you can get it to the heart of something through young adult fiction, this particular book takes big issues, things like bullying, or maybe, I'm trying to think of another one, maybe mental health issues. I remember that the book that was tied in with that was about a boy who had OCD. And I know that a lot of kids will joke, they'll do something and they'll say, oh, it's my OCD kicking in or something like that. But this really told the story of how debilitating something like OCD can be for a young man. In this case, actually, he was part of a group. So there was a whole group of teenagers that were trying to work through this. But at any rate, it helps us as readers and teachers and students to understand a big issue, to be able to read about it, to think about the things this book guides you through, things you would want to do before, during, and after reading. But it always lands on what you could do for, to engage the students in social action. So just, if you pick this book up at some point, it just has such great ideas. And some of them in the book include something that would promote resources or arguing for a policy change, kind of like what Jeff described, to create a club or an organization that deals with that, to develop a video library for other students so that they can educate themselves asynchronously. Maybe something like a kids' ed camp or a conference of some sort where the students bring speakers together so they can educate other students. Maybe it's a concert or a music festival. Well, they'll take the proceeds and donate it to an organization that would work toward change. Maybe it's, equipping peers or adults with a kit of resources. Maybe it's something that they create a website and they've got resources that people can use. But ultimately, as Dr. Parker says, we're charged with preparing children to be active citizens in a global democracy. We have to equip them with the tools to critique, change, and thrive in that world. So we want to think about all of these opportunities, regardless of the discipline that we teach. How can we empower our students as readers and writers? How can we center that around the things that matter to them? And again, I think that goes back to that motivation and engagement. We'll have them if we are able to think of things that matter to them. Tension creep up into their shoulders where it's so much grading you have to do for writing. But remember, you are in control of that as an educator. You don't necessarily have to think about reading every single thing that they write and making sure that you give feedback on every sentence, every word. That's overwhelming for you, but it's also overwhelming for them. Your students need some safe spaces to write and not be evaluated. In addition, we want them to grow, but we want to think about not only giving them areas of growth that are aligned with the learning targets for that assignment, but are also doable. That, we limit it down to one, this is a single point rubric. So we're only giving them one thing that they can work on to improve, where we might know what things they're already doing very well, that they're already moving towards mastery in that. But often when I worked with students, I would pick like 3 to 5 things so that they wouldn't feel overwhelmed. They could address those 3 to 5 things. They could be successful as they moved from their, draft to their final copy in whatever format that was. Jeff, I know you've done quite a bit more recently with grading. Anything you want to add to that?
I really like the idea of creating focus areas. And I really like what you have on the screen here too, with the single point rubric. This, I think, makes feedback very manageable for both us and for students. It's not, an overwhelming deluge. And the other point that I really, really like that you brought up is that students are going to need to write at a volume that exceeds what we can assess. And I guess more than that too, is students need to write in ways that, as you said, feel safe, that and that maybe are out of the range of our assessments. They need to be able to take chances. They need to be able to, it's an iterative process. They need to be able to engage. They need to be able to make mistakes. They need to be able to grow. So you said a lot of really great things. But I think the single point rubric is that, like we see on the screen, is a really great tool and a really great start for people that are looking to think a little bit beyond grading and think a little bit beyond the limitations of traditional grading on writers and writing and writerly identity. So this is a great tool.
I agree. And I thank you so much for adding that, Jeff. And I want to say too that this particular single point rubric, I want to give credit to Heather Rotterman. She's one of our assessment consultants, and she and I have talked about feedback. And the other thing that I wanted to add, because, just some of the points that Jeff made, we have to remember feedback is meant to be social. It's dialogic. So we want to offer students time to talk with us about that feedback. We don't want to make it a one-way street. So we give them an area of growth, but we then just say, go on your way, make those corrections, see you around, turn in the final copy on Tuesday. It should be something that we have some time to talk with them about. So something that I designed based on something from the Sweetland Writing Center from U of M was just a table, really, a revision plan. And I only gave them 3 to 5 spaces to put in something they wanted to revise, what their plan for revising it was. And for me, I added what would be the benefit of making this change in your paper. So just something that would let them think about the changes. And again, sometimes I would have that that down, ahead of time, where I would sit down and write my thoughts of revision for them, and they would write them, and that would give us a thing to talk about. So we both brought our revision plans to the conference, or other times they would write that revision plan based on the conference we just had. But it was always really minimizing the amount of things that they would need to address. Because I committed these sins as an early teacher, where I would write over the top of their sentences, and I would correct all of their, spelling mistakes, etc. And their whole paper looked like someone wrote over the top of it, and that overwhelmed them. It overwhelmed them, and it wasn't fair. I took away their voice in that process. So it took me a while to learn that less is more. and less is more, not only on the piece of writing itself, but across all of the writing assignments, because you really want them to have some time to grow. Any other thoughts on that before we move on? All right. I'm probably one of the worst at wait times. So if you do have something to say, don't hesitate to either throw it in the chat or just unmute. One of the things that I stumbled upon a few years ago was this 3 R's of implementation. And it really resonated with me because sometimes I'm in a conference as a learner and I think to myself, this is a great idea, but it wouldn't work in my context because of X, Y, or Z, or it's a great idea, but I would need so many resources that I don't have. So knowing that, what I encourage people to do is think about what's relevant to your classroom instruction, what's realistic when it comes to implementing something new, and what might you need to refine? What might you need to tweak a little just so that it fits your context? So take just a minute to think about that. We're going to move you into breakout rooms so you've got some time to talk with your colleagues. So what's relevant? What is realistic? And what might you need to refine? And Jeff, if it works for maybe three per breakout room.
Yep, we'll do 3 in 3 breakout rooms. How long do you want them there, Laura?
Why don't we give everybody about 8 minutes?
All right, cool. We'll see you back here at 4 o'clock, everybody. I'm going to open the rooms and you can head over when you get the invite. If you have any issues or trouble, let us know and we'll try to get you to the place you need to go.
Welcome back, everybody. Anyone willing to share what you talked about in the last few minutes? What's relevant, realistic? What might you need to refine?
One thing that our group found we mentioned was relevant was working across subject areas. I'm a GED teacher, so I teach all the subjects. That's really important to me.
I really think, Nancy, that speaks to our whole push. Is if we want it to be disciplinary in nature, we want the things that kids read and write about to be aligned with the discipline that they're studying. And then, like you said, for them to be able to see some connections. We do read and write across all of these things. It's just a little different. Anyone else?
In our group, we also talked about what was realistic, and we liked how the text sets was realistic, how we had the target set, the visual, the accessible, and then the informational. We discussed how in our classrooms, we have different ranges of reading levels in our classrooms, and how at times our students may not be at grade level, but if we introduce them to the different set levels, it can help boost, bring them up. We can also use our students that are there to help boost and bring them up, and we can use a variety of different text sets to help engage and move our students up. And that was more realistic for us.
I love that, Angela. And I wanted to remind you, if you haven't used ReadWorks or Newsella, the nice thing is you can take that same article and adjust the Lexile level. So sometimes that helps. Then everybody's reading the same text, but it's accessible to different students. It's the same information. So that often helps make something accessible, whether it's for individuals or for the whole class.
We talked about that, Nancy. So I said Newsella, it was ReadWorks. Thank you. I couldn't think of the name of the other one. I know I said I had a bookmark, but it was ReadWorks. Thank you.
I put the semi-link in the chat. You'll have to copy and paste it into a browser, but it's just readworks.org.
Yes, awesome. Thank you.
No problem.
And if I can just add to that piece, when we think about those text sets, right, particularly the level text for older students, they are used as an access point to the more complex text, right? We don't want to give them a steady diet of those level texts, because ultimately part of the work that we do as culturally responsive practitioners is to grant them access to on grade level text. So I just want to make that distinction in this conversation, because it is an entry point, it is an access point, but our whole goal and target is to transition them back to the grade level text.
Yes, thank you. We talked about that too, the equity that they deserve. Yes, thank you.
Definitely. And that is, you know, we need to move them up to that rigor. They need to be able to navigate complex texts. We want to give them, again, that accessible text as part of a layer. Something that Rosalyn and I did a couple of years ago. It became a labor of love, but we worked on what we called background knowledge quads. And this is just a visual of what we're talking about, where we had that target text, but we thought about 4 things that would help students build that background knowledge around whatever that text was. And those quads, you know, we just did this on basically a Word document. We had it divided into 4. We had that target text on the top, that driving question, or essential question, whatever it was that was, you know, part of why they were reading the text. But then we would think about, maybe it was text features that we wanted to help them navigate. Maybe it was a video that gave them some information about that particular historical time, or you know, related events. Maybe it was a map, so they could figure out where this was located. I mean, we had so many different things in those quads. It's unlimited what you could do to help build something that will help students understand that target text. That layered effect is really often overlooked. And it doesn't have to be 4, doesn't have to be a quad. It could be 2, it could be 1, it could be 3, whatever you can devise, so that they've got access to that text that's you know, part of the curricular resource. Anyone else? I just want to kind of close with our thought from Dr. Parker. You know, she says that brilliance can show up in all kinds of ways, and we need to make space. So where can we think about that lovely day that we opened our session with, that joy that drives us? We had some joyful experiences ourselves as beginning readers and writers, or maybe even later in life. We know that we need to value our students. We know we need to give them the opportunity to grow as readers and writers, but we need to encourage them. We need to give them space to be both successful and to have some struggles, because that's what it means to be literate. It's not easy. We have to give them that opportunity to struggle, but in a productive way towards growth. As we close today's session, we want to remind you, as we have before, that we've got a few upcoming events. We'd love to learn with you all year. We want you to think about as you're leaving for today. And it sounds like when you thought about things that were realistic, or that you could refine, or that were relevant to your instruction, you thought of something, which is wonderful. Maybe that becomes your action step for the year. So maybe it is building some text sets to make things more transparent for your students, more engaging, and help them comprehend those more difficult tasks that they will encounter, not only in your classrooms, but beyond. We hope that you'll take some time to collect data, think about the impact on your students and where that change has actually grown, you know, help them grow. You can see the impact of that one small change. And we would love you to join us at our equity-based disciplinary literacies network. Jennifer put this some more into the chat, or our Equity Leaders series. And as Jeff said last time, it's incredible, the people who will be joining us at this Leaders series this year. definitely take an opportunity to come to one or all. You will not be disappointed. All right, well, have a wonderful rest of your lovely day, and we look forward to seeing you at our final session on Thursday. If you have any questions, just let us know.